Hello, welcome to episode 16 of Happier Active. My name's Ellie. This week I had Gillian Bennett from Bite Size Nutri. This is like such a powerful and incredible conversation about food and relationships with food and nutrition and how to make all that stuff better. This is such an important issue that I am so passionate about, and I think the way that Gillian is able to talk about, like, from her own experience around underfueling and looking very fit and healthy from the outside, but actually not having great relationships with food, and how to improve that and change it and get to a point where you're in so much a better place around nutrition and fueling and feeling good in your body, how it actually is, and not kind of wishing and longing for a smaller body without considering your feelings and whether that's actually healthy and what your motivation is for doing these things. This is like a really brilliant and important conversation, so I cannot wait for you to listen to it, and I'm really looking forward to getting some feedback from you, because I think this is going to be one that's going to resonate with an awful lot of people, because it encompasses in a great way so much of the broader stuff that we end up talking about a lot with other people. And as ever, love to hear your thoughts, feedback, any topics you would like me to cover. I've had a few people suggest a couple of topics that they'd like to hear about, so once I'm ready to do my next batch of recordings, I'm gonna know some areas for people that I'm gonna look out for and try and get on. So anyway, enjoy this episode. There are many ways to find your path to better health and happiness, and what works is highly individualized. My philosophy is that most people are more likely to find that if they're active participants in their own journey. So this is a space to start exploring some of the rich and varied areas in which people practice, so you can start thinking about what resonates with you and discover new or different practices to either start or deepen your own health practices. And today I have Gillian Bennett, who is a nutritionist, coach and mentor. Welcome, and why don't you tell us a bit about what you do?
Hi, Ellie. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to chat with everyone. So my name is Gillian. I live in Barcelona. As you can tell, I'm not from Barcelona. I've been here for about a decade. And just a little bit about me. I am a crazy dog lady. And I'm definitely the person that will say hi to your dog before I will say hi to you. And I have been a nutrition and health coach now for almost 8 years. And I started actually in the CrossFit space. So I used to be pretty deep into Olympic weightlifting and CrossFit. Just a note, when people hear me say Olympic weightlifting, it's the style of weightlifting. I wasn't in the Olympics. And so I was very much deep into the sort of like cult of fitness. And I started nutrition coaching then when I was also falling deeper and deeper into macro tracking myself. And I had always struggled with my relationship with food and my relationship with body growing up. I always sort of had this belief that if I was just a little bit thinner, I would be more accepted, boys would like me more, sort of this belief of like things would be better if I could just get my body under control. And when I found macro tracking, I started to see that, I can control things, but the control got out of hand. And this is where I started to kind of spiral into being really obsessive with macros. I was really obsessive about my training. I ended up losing my menstrual cycle for 3+ years. And this really was a big wake-up call for me, because often we're told as women that like, you don't need a menstrual cycle unless you want to get pregnant, which is absolutely false. And I'm sure, Ellie, you know a ton about that. And so as I learned about female menstrual health, and I learned that what my gynecologist was telling me, which was, don't worry, unless you want to get pregnant, it's not a big deal. I learned that that was false. And so I had to really take my health into my own hands. And I don't say this in a weird woo-woo way, but it was basically like I had to stop overtraining and I had to stop under eating. And that for me was basically the catalyst that shifted me more into working with relationship with food, helping with body image, A lot of my clients come to me to stop restrictive dieting and still be able to find this balance of treating their body with kindness, because all they've ever known is beating their body into submission. And I mentor coaches, and I help them learn how to incorporate mindful eating practices into their coaching business. So that is me.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of interesting stuff there. So, yeah, I mean, you'd think that most people would understand that if your periods stop, not because of a menopause issue, that it's like your body putting up a pretty big red flag that there's something going on that's not great.
I feel that way now, but I can speak like like when I was in the process of it, I was like 28, 29, 30. And I was like, I don't want kids. I'm single. Like, I don't have a period. That's amazing, because now my like CrossFit competitions or my Olympic weightlifting, like none of that is interrupted by my period. Like, I don't have mood swings. So in my head, I was like, this is cool, because no one tells you that your menstrual cycle is actually a really great sign of health.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, I mean, because I think all the stuff you're doing is so great, because it's such a big issue with like a lot of women, is that, and I mean, and some men as well, but like with this kind of the diet culture. And I mean, I'm really interested in chronic underfueling, because it's such a big problem that I see with so many people.
Yeah, I think the interesting part also about chronic underfueling is that we don't necessarily understand that it also counts if you're under eating one day and overeating another day. Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting, and I'm not like an expert on this, but there's been some research around even being in a caloric deficit during certain hours of the day, depending on your level of fitness and your level of athleticism, can contribute to like hormonal disruptants and things like that, which is like the normal everyday person. It's like not a big deal if they undereat a little one day and overeat a little another day. But if you're training like an hour plus a day, you do need to be fueling your body for the training that you're doing. And often we have this like, oh, well, I want to fuel for performance and I want to fuel for aesthetics. And it's like, those are two different goals.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard. I think it's interesting you talking about CrossFit, because me and my husband used to do CrossFit. He did it a lot to support marathon training, and really enjoyed it. It was a really good gym that we used to go to in the UK that was one of the owners was a nutritionist, so they had pretty good advice around that stuff. But when I moved here, I tried to America, I tried to join a CrossFit box. And what I do when I join gyms, especially if I can tell that they're going to be really focused on how you look over health performance. I mean, like, so basically, for full disclosure, I mainly exercise for mental health reasons. I'm not terribly interested in what it does to what I look like. That's obviously like a side bonus, but my main reason is it really calms me down. I'm less anxious if I'm exercising regularly, and I like CrossFit because it's heavy and it's different every day, so I don't get bored.
Yeah.
But normally when I go to those kind of new places, if I can tell they're going to be pushy about that sort of stuff, I say a few things that ought to make them understand that I have like a history of disordered eating, and so I don't like to focus on that because it's not helpful to me. And this guy honestly said to me, he was like, well, people do actually mind about what you look like, so it does actually help you if you do that. I was like, oh, I think this probably is not the gym for me.
Yeah.
But it's quite interesting because it kind of pushes this.
It does. And I have to say, so for me, I, right before COVID, was coaching CrossFit and was in the gym quite a lot. And I have been thinking a lot now, because it's been like 5 years since COVID, about what is it that really supported me in being okay with, like, because I had to gain some weight for my health. Like, I was way too lean for my body. I was hungry all the time. I was cold all the time. My hair was falling out. It was not a good look. And I had to get over this fear of gaining weight and this fear of like not having the quote unquote like hot body anymore. And just to be completely, like, those of you that can't see me, I don't know if this is posted a video, I'm like a straight size, 5 foot tall, like, kind of, you would look at me and be like, there's nothing that stands out particularly about this person's physique. Right. Mm-hmm. But back then, I felt like my physique was on display all the time. And so since my body was on display all the time and I was actually displaying it, it was like, no wonder I put so much importance on that. And I think it's so important also for people to recognize is like, what are the environments like that I'm putting myself in? And because for you, like you were like, oh, this isn't going to work for me. Like, I know that this would be a toxic atmosphere, but I think sometimes we're just not aware of like specific environments that you're like, oh, this is why I feel like crap about my body.
Yeah, because I like to feel strong, but I acknowledge that I'm quite unusual for a woman in my late 30s in the kind of culture that we all grew up in, that I've always enjoyed exercise for how it makes me feel, not how it makes me look. And I know that that's pretty, and most of the women that I work with trying to get out of that mindset, like you were saying, of it being about getting smaller is quite hard.
Yeah, it is. It is hard. I think it is hard, yet at the same time, I think we often like give up. We're like, but the world is so physique focused, right? Like I hear this with my clients where they'll be like, I don't want to care as much about what I look like, but I feel like everyone else does. And so much of that I feel like is forgetting what like one, who is actually important in your life. Because if we really think about it, and something that I often like to ask clients to do when we talk about this is to say, hey, the people that you value the most in your life, what do you value about them? Like, what is it that you truly value about them? Is it that they wear a size 6? Or is it that every time you hang out with them, you feel like recharged with energy? And that can sometimes be like really eye-opening to be like, oh, wait, okay. Like people that care about physique, it's often more about them than it is about me.
Yes. And that is very true, I think. But it is a hard thing to understand. It's actually an analogy that I use a lot for when people it's a similar thing, but it's not about weight. But when people are so bad at asking for help, and I say like, try and remember what you think, how you feel when you help someone. And like one of your friends, and like say they're sick or something, and you take them food or you walk their dog for them, and it makes you feel great. And so when you're asking for help, you're giving your friends who love you the chance to like give that back to you. And it's that same thing of like, it's really easy to do stuff for other people, but it's really hard to, so you're like, oh, I don't care if my friend puts on 10 pounds, but if I do, they obviously are going to care.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes we also assume it's like, I've had friends that have told me, they've been like, oh yeah, I've gained some weight recently. I'm like, I genuinely did not even notice.
Yeah.
Like I did not notice. But I think also it is important to be able to set those boundaries, which I think can be really hard. Like I know that when I was very much like in the cult of fitness and like my physique was very, very important to me, it was hard for me to set those boundaries with people of like, I don't want you to comment on what I look like, because since I put so much importance on it, I was basically trying to show off what I looked like and get compliments and get comments on what I looked like. And so it was almost like hypocritical of me to try to set boundaries around it. And when I started to really, like when I would compliment someone, I wouldn't compliment on a physical appearance. I would compliment on something non-related to physicality. And as I started to do that more, I recognized that I started to get it back more as well. And that felt really nice because it was something that I could actively do without really making a big deal out of it. But it changed the way I thought and it changed the way I interacted with the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I try and do that. And that, again, it's like, yeah, while you're looking really strong or like that colour looks really nice on you, I always try and do those kind of compliments. But also because you don't... So basically, it's much better now. But what used to happen in my 20s when I was also bad at a lot of this stuff, one of the signs that my mental health was getting bad would be that I wouldn't eat very well. So I would lose weight. And often I wouldn't have noticed that was happening, but other people would say to me, oh my God, what have you been doing? You've lost loads of weight.
You're like, hi, I'm depressed and anxious.
Yeah. And that would often be how I would realise that I was, depressed and anxious and not treating it. And it is interesting how many people feel completely comfortable just commenting on your body. And I definitely then didn't know how to shut that down. And then because they think it's a compliment, it's hard to be like, oh my God, that means I'm really ill.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a tough one because one of the things that we know about individuals who struggle with disordered eating and body image issues is they tend to be quite perfectionist, which also tends to might be higher in anxiety, much higher in self-criticism, all of these things, and also often tend to be people pleasers. And if you're a people pleaser, it feels really uncomfortable to be like, hey, I know you mean well, but please don't comment on my body, because you're like, oh my God, are they going to be mad at me? And so it can almost feel like this cycle where you're like, I don't want to be as focused on my body, but everyone else is, but I'm too scared to tell them that. And so a lot of it, I think, comes just by like leading by example and explaining. I think one of the really fun things to do is explain why you're doing something. You say, oh my gosh, that color looks really great on you. Someone will be like, oh, thank you. And you can even tell them unsolicited, I'm really doing my best to not comment on people's bodies just because I find that I feel really self-conscious when that happens to me. And you're not telling anyone to do anything, but you're sharing your experience. And I think that can also be a really beautiful way to bring people in to your experience and do it without telling someone what to do or even setting a boundary, which can sometimes feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's great advice, I think. Yeah, and so something that I've been talking to people a lot about recently, so I work with a lot of new mums, and I certainly think some people are triggered if you even use the word boundary. So it's ways of setting these things without necessarily doing it explicitly, because I guess now, because it's been it's become almost like a buzzword, that people find it, so finding ways of doing it that are making a clear line but without explicitly saying this is a boundary that I have or whatever.
Yeah, that's the thing about social media, right? Is that it turns all of these really powerful tools and words and concepts into buzzwords. I mean, I think we've seen the same thing happen with intuitive eating, where intuitive eating is this really incredible methodology that has a lot of science behind it. It has a lot of experience behind it. It's very specific and prescriptive. And you see people on social media being like, well, intuitive eating doesn't work. And it's you don't actually know what intuitive eating is. And so that's why it didn't work for you. But I think it's really damaging, because now we also see people on social media talking about boundaries, and they're talking about boundaries in this way where it's you're setting this really rigid limit and cutting people out of your life. And, people are talking about not talking to their parents anymore, and these really big things. Where it's no, a boundary is just it's like a guideline. It's like a this is where I end and you begin type thing.
Yeah, and it's fluid, and it's also how I often try and explain to people, it's just about what you're prepared to accept and how you're going to react to other people behaving in a way that you don't like, and because you can't stop them doing that. All you can do is be okay, we're going to go now because you're obviously upset, or all right, you're going to shout at me, I'll call you back later, all those kind of things. But it doesn't have to be a big, I'm never going to speak to you again, you try again, and
Yeah.
It's good practice for
Ellie,
toddlers.
I think what you hit on, though, is really important, because I think often people mistake boundaries of I'm going to tell you how to treat me. And your boundary is I always use this example with clients, where my boundaries with my coaching clients, when I first started coaching, many coaches, it was 7 days a week, I'm always available. Text me anytime, I'll be there. And so my boundary for my clients now is, hey, you can text me whenever you want. I will respond during my working hours. And so it's not my client's responsibility to look at what time it is when they text me. It's my responsibility to uphold my boundary and say, I'm not going to be working during the hours that I'm not working.
Yeah, so I've talked about this on here before, but I don't have my work emails on my phone. They're only on my computer. And, anyone who actually has an emergency has my phone number. But again, I won't respond if it's not an emergency. And, anyone who doesn't have my personal phone number, it's definitely not something that I need to action straight away, because we don't have the relationship where they have the need to get hold of me.
Yeah. I think when we look at this in terms of health, I think often this is where people pleasing gets us into so much trouble, because I hear it with clients. For example, I work with clients in a few different sort of realms. One is the chronic dieter that's been very, very strict for a long time. The other is the person that's tried to be very strict, but often finds themselves like overeating or having the occasional binge episode. And often what I'll see with that type of client is they because of people pleasing, they'll often overeat in social situations because they don't want to like piss anyone off. And learning to like say no thank you politely is almost like a game changer, because we often have these beliefs of like, well, if I say no, they're going to think this about me. And I find that when we start to break that down and say like, okay, well, is that true? Like if you were to offer someone food and they said no, how would you feel? And sometimes people are like, I would feel a little bit offended. I was like, okay, so if they just said flat out no, you might not feel good. But what if they said no, thank you? Can I have a piece to take home for later? Because I'd love to eat this like with a cup of tea later on. How would you feel then? It's like, oh, there are so many different ways to express how I feel without it just being like a hard no, or without it being really like standoffish. And I think learning that communication can be so powerful for our well-being, because it helps us also set boundaries with ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that's often the hardest thing is somehow we tie our like self-esteem and our sort of sense of value about ourselves to all of those kind of things, and you worry that then people aren't going to like you if you don't have the second bit of pudding or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's this weird scenario because it's like, well, people are going to judge me if I don't have this, this extra bit of pudding, but people are also going to judge me if I'm like eating too much, but they're also going to judge me if I'm overweight, but they're going to judge me if I'm on a diet. It's like, we can never really control what people think about us. And so if we think about it like that, it's like people may think things about you no matter what you do. And so I think it's one of the easiest things to say and hardest things to do is actually learn just to be true to your own criteria. And I think developing your own criteria is really hard because there's so many inputs as to like, you should do this or you should do that. I mean, if you go on social media right now and you scroll through reels, you're going to get a reel that says you have to track macros. You're going to get another reel that says like tracking macros is toxic and disordered. You're going to get another reel that says women over 35 shouldn't do cardio. And then the next one is going to be women over 35 need to do more cardio.
Yeah. And so actually that's basically why I started this podcast, because my kind of central view is that all of these things work for the right people. And so the more important thing is finding the thing that works for you, that you can manage in a way that isn't disordered and makes you happier and actually works with your life. Because all of these things work for the right people. Some people need to do the macros because they've got that very like type A, everything's got to be planned out. Other people really don't want to because it tends them down a rabbit hole of disordered eating. Other people want to be able to do all their cooking on Sunday for the whole week. Other people want spontaneity. And so finding the thing that actually works for you is the key.
Yeah. I know it's your podcast, but I want to ask you a question because I think that probably a lot of people are thinking, okay, but how do I find what's right for me? And so when someone asks you that, kind of what's your answer?
So I normally by the time people are coming to me, it's because they've tried quite a lot on their own. So normally we start with, okay, what other things have you tried before? Did you enjoy? And then why did you stop doing them? Because often, so if it's not food related, but say exercise related, so a lot of people I work with don't like exercise, but know they need to do more. So often they'll have said, I used to really enjoy this class at the gym, but then the teacher left, or I didn't like the environment of so it's finding what was the thing that was working, and then how can we tweak it to make it a bit more sustainable. And then I often find that people have tried to change way too much at once. And so I'm really big on one thing at a time. So actually if it's like food, all right, what's the one thing that you're doing that is not helping? So whether that's having soda every day, all right, well, let's start by either not having soda at all or moving to a diet one. Or most people know what the worst thing they're doing is. But rather than trying to change everything at once, let's pick one thing, do that for a couple of weeks, see how we feel about it, and then really, really slowly. Because if you try and change everything at once, then you're getting into the kind of things that you were talking about of being in a huge deficit, or it's not sustainable. And then the first time you go on vacation or to a birthday party, then you get into that all or nothing mindset of it's got to be perfect every day. And the minute I don't do it, we'll give up. and just go back to what we were doing a month ago, which is why you've ended up with, you know, pre-diabetes or at risk for heart disease. So
yeah, I completely agree with you. I think the changing one thing at a time can be really powerful, and it's also really hard, right? Because people are like, but I want to do all the things right now. And I think it's almost like when we take a step back and we look at it, you're like, oh yeah, I can see why changing my entire lifestyle around while I was also, you know, at a new job, and while I was also, you know, trying to take care of my sick mom, like I can see why that might not work. But then somehow, like as humans, I think one of our brilliant capacities is like we can conveniently forget and just be like, oh, but it didn't work because I just wasn't trying hard enough. And so we can kind of like,
and then that gives you the shame spiral, which doesn't help. And that's the other thing. If people really want to change lots of things at once, then I might say, all right, we'll do like one nutrition thing, one like maybe put in a sleep routine, and then one smalls, maybe go for like a 50-minute walk or do some meditation. You know, so you can do something, but they're not all going to be in the same zone. Yeah,
but I think the shame spiral is a really important one, and is probably the thing. I would say that shame and self-criticism are the things that keep people stuck in negative spirals more than we think. Like we often are like, oh, but it's a willpower thing, or oh, it's a self-control thing. And what actually happens is that the more that we beat ourselves up for not being perfect, the less we're actually able to learn from what didn't work or what hasn't worked in the past. And I think if, like, to anyone listening, aiming to be neutral about your behavior, and sometimes what can even work is like just writing down what happened and trying to take out like the emotion words or the judgment words, just writing down like, you know, went to a birthday party, ate 4 slices of pizza. Okay, cool. So that's an objective thing. Oh my gosh, I'm such a pig, or like I completely failed. Like that's all a judgment. What actually happened is you went to a birthday party, you ate 4 slices of pizza. Cool. What does that tell you? Well, what happened before? Okay, so I was really hungry before, but I didn't want to eat because I knew there was going to be pizza and I didn't want to ruin my diet. Okay, so what happened before? I didn't eat anything before I went. Okay, could that have something to do with why you ate 4 slices of pizza? Maybe. And I think that people often jump straight to, well, I just need to try harder, or like there's something wrong with me. And often there's a really great explanation for our behavior if we can simply look at what actually happened and what we did. And we can do, so like within behavior change, we can almost look at like a behavior chain of like this happened and then this happened and then this happened and then this happened. And often you can see what needs to be changed by looking at the specific behavior instead of going straight to like the emotional, like beating yourself down. Mm-hmm. And it can actually be really powerful for changing your behavior when you can look at, okay, these are the things that actually happened versus this is how I feel about what happened.
Yeah. And that's really hard, I think, especially for people who've got disordered relationships with food. Because then even really quite neutral things can feel very loaded. Yeah.
They 100% can. And I think that, and this is like where doing an exercise like that and challenging someone to be like, okay, write it down, but now write it down again, taking out any words that are like too much, too little, like any of the judgment words, so like the adjectives, and any of the feeling words, and see what's left. Mm-hmm. And that can be really interesting because then you're left with just the facts of what happened.
Yeah.
And then
which
you
is
can
basically,
look at,
in that example, I was too hungry. So instead of just having 1 slice, then I had 4, where actually if I'd had something to eat before, I would have just enjoyed the one bit as a treat or whatever.
Yeah.
Not as a treat. We're not using positive, negative language, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it can be like a really interesting self-exploration journey as well. I think for me, one of the things that I really expected would happen when I stopped tracking macros is I kind of thought I would just go crazy on all the food that I never used to let myself eat. I was like, I'm just going to like eat cinnamon rolls and cookies and all of this food that I never let myself eat. And I found that actually wasn't the case because I still wanted to feel good. And so like, even if I did have a cookie one day, I was like, well, it's not like I want to eat another one like every single day in a row. One, they just don't taste as good after you've had them a couple days in a row. And two is like, I don't feel physically well when I eat that way. And I think that's often one of the fears that keeps people from letting go of a lot of their rules around food is this, but I'm just going to swing the pendulum in another direction. And that will, like, I will tell people, like, that will happen if you're telling yourself you're going to go back onto a diet later. Like, if you're saying, oh, I'm only letting myself eat what I want for, like, this week, then yeah, you're probably going to go crazy during that week. But when you tell yourself, like, wait, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, I am not going to be restricting, you know, myself to can't have any bread anymore, then eating bread maybe feels exciting at the beginning. And then you get to a point where you're like, yeah, it's just bread.
Yeah. Oh, this morning I feel like having peanut butter and toast. So that's what I'm going to have.
Exactly.
It's not like
I will probably have some after this podcast recording.
Yeah, to be honest, that's my go-to fast breakfast, and that covers every base. But yeah, it is interesting. I think once people get it, it's actually quite quick, but it's getting to the bottom of what the issue is. And the other thing I find is that, which I think comes back to some of what you were saying, is that often people have set these goals, but they're not really what they want. They're what other people think that they want. So it might be like, oh, you know, I want to lose 10 pounds, but if you try and dig into why, they don't really know, because it's a kind of ever-shifting goalpost, isn't it? If your whole thing is, I'm just going to be happier if I'm smaller, then you get smaller and the root cause of the unhappiness hasn't been solved. So then you think, oh, it must be being even smaller than that, or doing this thing, or, you know, getting rid of my belly or the bit under my arm, and so it's not really, so trying to find out the root cause of that is often more powerful, of like, what's the thing that you're trying to solve, because I don't think it's weight.
Yeah, it usually isn't. And what's really interesting is that more and more research has been coming out recently around all of the benefits around internally regulated eating styles and weight neutral approaches to changing eating behavior. And so for anyone listening that's like, what are you talking about? So internally regulated eating styles are like mindful eating, intuitive eating, eating competence, which are a few different kind of frameworks for this eating. And internally regulated eating is essentially a style of eating where your eating choices are based mainly around your internal cues. So hunger and fullness, preferences, body food choice congruence, which is really fascinating. Like when you start to be more connected with your body and pay more attention to how your body feels, your body actually tells you what it needs. So like when you notice, I'm noticing a craving for red meat, that's your body actually telling you that maybe you need some protein, or maybe you're a little bit low in iron. And like, it can be so powerful to learn how to do that. But these internally regulated eating styles, most people are like, oh no, this is bullshit. Like people are terrible at knowing how much food they need. And yes, there are some underlying root causes that you've probably seen of like leptin resistance and things like that do make it challenging for people to regulate their hunger and fullness. But overall, what keeps coming out in research over and over is that individuals that tend to eat in these styles tend to have higher satisfaction, or higher body satisfaction, lower levels of stress and anxiety around eating. They tend to exercise more frequently. They like all of these incredible benefits that we try to get through dieting can actually be found through learning the skills that someone needs to actually listen to what their body is telling them. And
I find it easier to do when I'm eating more whole foods, and so I
100%.
I am kind of aware that when you're eating like a lot more processed food, it is harder because that stuff doesn't sit in your body the same way, so it is harder to notice those cues because you're kind of interrupting that internal thing by not eating whole foods, basically.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I think it obviously, if we're eating an entire bag of chips, that's not going to give us the same satiety signals as eating a handful of chips with a sandwich. And I think that's where like the nutrition education plus these skills is so powerful. But so much nutrition education is like highly dogmatic, because especially for individuals in larger bodies, it's just assumed that like this needs to be for you to lose weight. But what we know is that when the intention and the focus is on fat loss, that often like maintains a lot of the challenges that people have with fat loss. Yeah. And so it's this like catch-22 that unfortunately I think the fitness industry is stuck in, where they're telling you you must lose weight, but at the same time a lot of the research is pointing to, hey, if we actually focus more on like health-centric behaviors, you're going to be a lot better off.
Yeah, and so that's why. So the reason that I chose to call my company Happier Active, and I kind of mean like having an active body and mind, and being so not just being like, oh, the doctor said to take this pill or whatever, Ozempic or this thing, and it will just magic. It's like, actually, no, I need to actively participate in the education, the figuring out what's going to work for me, what's the root cause of this stuff, because that's how you make long-term change, if you're actively engaged in your own solutions, which are very individualized, right? They're, especially like you say, when people are very overweight, because the assumption is that they're definitely just going to want to lose weight. And actually, there's a book, it's from the 80s, but a lot of it still stands up, but it's called Fat as a Feminist Issue. And she talks about, for a lot of women, if you've been overweight for a long time and you start losing weight, suddenly people start noticing you in a way they hadn't before, because you're quite invisible when you're overweight. And that can be incredibly uncomfortable if you're quite shy, and suddenly everyone starts going, oh my God, you look amazing. Oh my God, this. Or men might start noticing you, and it's uncomfortable, and then you want to put it back on, and that's got nothing to do with your health. It's a social issue. And so there's all sorts of reasons that are nothing to do with health for why people get stuck in these patterns.
Yeah. I think that where we need to be moving more towards is like what actually makes me feel better rather than what makes the scale go down, which is really hard, right? Because there's so much pressure, especially, from doctors, where like an overweight person will walk into a doctor's office and the doctor will look at him and be like, oh yeah, you just need to lose weight. And I had a client that this happened to the other day, where her company had like company wellness checks or something and she sat down with a doctor that she'd never met before, who just like looked at her height and weight and said, oh, you need to lose weight. And this client's blood work is fantastic. She's super active. She like swims 3 times a week for like an hour and a half every morning. Like, she's more active and eats healthier than a lot of individuals I know, but she's in a larger body. And I think so much of that is like, it is so challenging to balance that, because when you live in a larger body, you're getting from so many different angles. Like, you need to look different, because looking different signifies like changing your health, even though, and the screwed up thing is like, we have research that shows otherwise.
Yes, and I imagine that when you were so unhealthy that your period to stop and your hair was falling out, a lot of people would just assume that you're super healthy because you were in a really small body. Oh yeah, and I got so many compliments on my physique back then. And what's interesting now is that I don't, like, our brains tend to focus on what we prioritize. And so back then, when I would get a comment on my body, I would latch onto it, be like, yes, like, this person thinks I look good. And the funny thing now is, like, I don't really remember the last time anyone commented on my appearance. And it's not that it doesn't happen, because I'm sure it does, but I just don't latch onto it, because that's not what's important to me. What I put more importance on, and this is where I think, going back to like finding what's right for you, is like my values. So I value being creative, and I value connection with other people, and I value freedom in my life. And so if someone tells me I'm like really good at comedy improv, which is one of my hobbies, then hell yeah, I'm going to remember that comment. But if someone's like, oh, you look like you've lost weight, like, I've just like, will brush it off, and I don't even think about it anymore. And I think that can be a really powerful thing for people to start looking at, is like, what do I actually value, and what's actually important to me, and what is it that I really want to like live out in my life? Because for me, for so long, especially when I was really deep in disordered eating, my creativity was very stifled because I just didn't have the energy for it. Because like all my energy went towards bandwidth.
Yeah, exactly. All my energy went toward training and like how I looked and like what I weighed and like meal prepping, right? And now I'm able to be creative in so many different ways, whether it's like diving into a fantasy fiction book, or whether it is going to an improv class, or whether it's going to like attending a comedy show, or like collaborating with someone on a talk for something. And I think we do ourselves such a disservice when our life revolves around diet and fitness, because like nutrition and fitness facilitate our lives. Like if I didn't eat fairly healthy, I wouldn't have the energy to go to comedy improv. If I didn't eat, if I didn't exercise, I wouldn't have the energy to go walking with my dog every day, which is a really important part of my life. And I think that when we frame it like that, starting like values first and thinking about what is actually important to you, that can make a really big change. I know for me, that was a big catalyst in my changes, being like, wait, I'm so disconnected from my values.
Yeah. And I work a lot with people who really hate exercise, and a lot of people, have a lot of trauma around exercise from high school if they're not naturally sporty.
Yeah.
And it's actually interesting that I will quite often say, a lot of people when they have kids suddenly, and their kids become toddlers and they're quite active and they can't keep up with them, will suddenly start panicking about that stuff. And so one of the things that I'll say is like, right, well, it doesn't have to be, you just need to get your heart rate up. So like you can walk, like one of the things is just park a bit further away from the store, so you're just getting a bit more walking in. Doesn't have to be anything crazy, but also just do stuff with your kids. It's fun. You can put some music on YouTube and have a dance party, and you're getting your heart rate up, and that's good for you, and it's fun, and it's interacting with your kids, and you're still getting a lot of benefit from it. Exercise doesn't have to be like going to the gym and doing Olympic weightlifting. It can be like, and you can do stuff with your kids. So like my daughter, she's 2, she loves counting. So like we now both, me and my husband, will do like a couple of sets of like something, squat to something at home, and have her count them, and she loves it. She can count to about 4, so it's just 1, 2, 3, 4 over and over again. But it's like it's modeling to her like healthy behavior, but it's fun. It like she's seeing us doing something good and learning it, but also it doesn't have to be about going to the gym for an hour. You can do that 4 times a day, and you've actually done maybe 50 squats.
Yeah. I actually had a client once who saw some pretty, like she was out of shape, hadn't exercised for a really long time, and one of her goals was fat loss. And one of the things that we implemented was like a daily dance party with her kids, and that she actually saw some pretty significant physical results in doing that. Whereas like for a really long time, she was like, I feel like I need to be going to the gym. I feel like I need to be like doing a workout video or something like that. And I was like, just what do you like doing? What do you already do on a regular basis? And how can you like amp that up a little bit? And that I think can be really powerful, especially when people have kids. Because like the fact of the matter is, if you have kids and you have a job and you have a family, like you don't. I mean, when I was spending 2 hours in the gym every day, it was because I was single and like no kids, didn't have a dog back then either. And now with like a dog and a business and a partner and like all of that stuff is, I don't have time to spend 2 hours in the gym. And if I did spend 2 hours in the gym every day, I would be sacrificing all of the other things that I love in my life.
Yeah. And that's the thing, because I think a lot, again, coming back to this like toxic Instagram sort of social media stuff, is that you'll see loads of those videos that like, you do have time, you spent half an hour scrolling on the and it's not helpful, because you don't really have time. Like a lot of the time that I spend on social media is because my child wants me to just sit in a corner while she plays, and I'm not allowed to get off the sofa. She's like, sit down. You're like, right, I'm just sitting here. So I'll just do some of my admin while you're not looking at me and playing. But if I try and stand up, I get told to sit down again. Great. Like but we can then do stuff together. So that's not time that I could actually use in the gym, but I could use that to be like, okay, well, let's do something together instead. Like we'll have a dance party, do some stuff. And then as they get older, they might want to start trying new things, mountain biking, big active things. And if you're a bit fitter, but also a bit more confident, then you're much more likely to be like, oh, let's try that together, rather than being like, oh, I have to find someone to pay to teach you that because I'm not confident enough, don't feel good enough in myself, or don't, all of these things kind of feed into the idea that you can start doing all these things together.
Yeah, I think the concept of like, I take care of myself so that I can do more in my life, I think is really powerful, because so much of diet and fitness is sort of framed as like sacrifice. Like there's all this talk about like sacrifice and trade-offs, and it's like, well, no, you shouldn't be cooking 3 different meals for you and your kids and your husband just so that you can stick to your diet, because that doesn't allow you to do more in your life. That just keeps you chained to the stove.
Miserable. You're not going to enjoy that.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of the time, I I see, and I've worked with moms that are like, well, but my kids only eat quote unquote unhealthy food. And it's like, you can eat that stuff too and add something else alongside of it. I think I remember a mom that I worked with, like a moment where her mind was blown, where she was like, well, my kids just want to eat chicken Alfredo. And I was like, can you throw some broccoli in there? She was like, oh my gosh, that sounds really good. And that like was a moment for her where she all of a sudden was like, wait a minute, I don't actually have to do anything more, because broccoli can be boiling while I'm boiling the pasta. And I've just solved my problem right there. And I think a lot of the time it is like that struggle with the flexibility of, wait, it doesn't have to be this one specific thing. Like, your kids are eating mac and cheese, eat some mac and cheese.
Yeah. We actually, my husband and me have very different needs for carbs. And so, but we'll always have the same protein, but then and the same vegetables. And then we'll quite often like, basically he won't have carbohydrates and I will, because I'm an absolute monster for them. But so, but like my body like runs on carbs. I once tried to do keto, and within a week I was like, literally couldn't get out of bed. My metabolism needs carbohydrates. And so, but it's interesting because you can be really flexible. So we're still essentially eating the same food, but like with some slight differences. And it's much easier that way, because there was a point where we were both cooking different meals, and we weren't actually spending very much time together.
Yeah, and I wish that, if someone gets one thing from this podcast, is that like diet and fitness should facilitate your life, not make it harder. And I think that when we kind of dive into like a little bit more creative thinking of how to do that, it can actually be really fun instead of be like very like heavy and weighty.
Yes, and that's and I was talking to someone a few weeks ago, and I think you'll probably resonate, but like a lot of people use exercise as punishment, and it just shouldn't be, because then it's so much easier to stop. Like, if you want these long lasting changes, making these things sustainable and things that you actually enjoy, and finding things that you love to eat that are not
And I want to play devil's advocate a little bit here, just because like this is something that I've heard from clients before, where it's like some people, we like often will hear professionals give out the advice of like, find exercise that you enjoy. And there's some people that are like, I don't enjoy exercise. And I think that's okay too. Like, that's okay if you don't enjoy exercise. You can still value exercise for what it allows you to do in your life, right? And I think one of the things that was really... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. No, so I love walking, so that's my like exercise that I enjoy. I absolutely hate running, but I do it 3 times a week because how I reframe that for myself is running's medicine for me. I do not enjoy it. I'm not good at it, but it is the only thing that makes my brain calm down. So I just have to do it, but I treat it as like a medical need. For half an hour 3 times a week, I have to go for a run.
Yeah, so yeah. And I think though, so like when we look at motivation and how motivation works, is you can like doing something for the joy of doing it, and that can be really motivating because it's like you're like, I genuinely enjoy it. But it can also be really motivating to be like, I do this because it aligns with who I am, right? And so I think like,
and I'm a much nicer person if I do that.
Yeah, being a mom or being a nicer person or being good at your job, whatever it is that you want to identify yourself as, is you can say, well, I can be who I am because I exercise. And I think especially for individuals that perhaps do struggle with their weight or do live in larger bodies and it maybe isn't as comfortable to move, is looking at it as, how do I turn this into, I am the kind of person who can be really, it can make the motivation part so much easier, and you don't have to like it. I think that's the thing.
No,
is like,
I'm the kind of person who, when my kids say I want to go and try this new thing, I can do it with them because I've got enough in my tank, because I put the work in. Or when my husband says, oh, there's this new place but we've got to walk to it, I can do that because I don't have to think twice about whether or not I'm physically capable of doing that walk or that thing.
Exactly, because it's meaningful for you to be able to do those things. And I think that when people are like, I don't like exercising or I don't like eating nutritious food for whatever reason, is like, well, what does it facilitate in your life? Yeah. Like, is being able to exercise going to make it easier when you go to Disneyland with your kids and you have to be on your feet all day? Well, in that case, it is something that is valuable to you. And you can, on the days where you're like, I'm not motivated to do it, you can visualize, you can literally visualize, I'm going to be going to Disneyland with my kids and I want to be able to walk around with them and not feel like my knees are killing me, right? And when it comes to food as well, I think sometimes it's like people are like, well, I don't like to cook, or I don't like healthy food, or I'm not good at cooking. And in the United States right now, there are so many options. If you live in a state that has Trader Joe's, for example, oh my God, Trader Joe's is like, has everything. Even in regular grocery stores, there is nothing like a rotisserie chicken and one of those like salad mixes to just be like a fairly decently priced and like pretty filling meal.
Yeah, we do now, like, because we've got an air fryer, and so like our quick, easy meal is just like chicken wings, because you can just buy them in bulk. We've always got them in the freezer. We actually pre-season them, but like, you don't have to. And it just means like, if we've had a really chaotic day, like last night, suddenly at 7:15, we were like, shit, we haven't done anything about food for ourselves. And, you know, it's 15 minutes, and you can just chuck them in and go away and come back 15 minutes later, they're cooked, bag of salad, done. Like, really easy. Didn't have to think about it. It's not really cooking, but it's all proper food.
Yeah. Well, and I also, one of the things I want to say is like, this is where ChatGPT can be so helpful. And like, I've recommended this because I tend to like snoop in some Facebook groups where people are like talking about like, I don't know what to eat. Like, will someone tell me, like, give me a meal plan? Like, tell me what to eat. And ChatGPT, you can literally go into ChatGPT, even if you don't pay for it. And you can say, hey, I'm a mom with 2 kids. My kids don't like this. My husband doesn't like this. This is what I prefer to eat. And ChatGPT will literally plan your meals for you and even give you a grocery list. Yes. And I think that is like, it's mind blowing how convenient it is to be able to be like, at one point, it's like, we don't need to do this. We don't need to like stress ourselves out doing it. This is what AI is for, making our lives easier.
Yeah. Do you know what? It's so funny on this podcast, the number of people who've given like amazing AI like ChatGPT prompts for people in various different areas. It's because there's so many. I just don't think of it. I always think of it as being something for like work, like, how should I structure this page on my website or like on the newsletter, whatever. And honestly, so many people have said, and that's a really good one. But there's loads of people have given little things of like, oh, that's actually the kind of thing I just asked ChatGPT, like, what skincare routine should I do, like, or this, and it's amazing what it can, if you're a bit creative, what it can help you with.
100%. And I think this is where, like, for people that are busy, is let's say with the exercise thing, let's say you're like, hey, you want to exercise, you don't know what to do, you don't have any ideas, ask ChatGPT. Be like, hey, I want to be more active, these are my parameters, this is how much time I have. ChatGPT will give you ideas.
Yeah. And we have like a rotation in our house of like maybe 15 meals that are like weekday staples so that we don't get bored, but they're all things that can be made in 15 minutes. And occasionally we'll do something different, but they're the kind of, on the days when you can't think, because we know they're things we'll always have all the ingredients in stock. We'll always, and it's really helpful. Once you've figured those things out, we always know any weekday without much thought, there's 5 or 6 things that we can make in 15 minutes that are pretty filling and pretty easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've spent enough time doing this that like you probably have them in your head. And for someone that's brand new is like, please use AI to do this for you because so much, and this is, I think, where coaches are so helpful is like a coach can help you with the part where you're like, I know what to do, but I'm not doing it. We can educate you as well. But like, as far as meal planning and stuff like that, like use AI for that because you're wasting your money if you're asking a coach to plan your meals for you. Like where a coach is the most powerful is like for that accountability, for that support, to have like to be able to have like a third person, like an outside person to actually look at your behavior and help you see things a bit more objectively and help you develop skills. But yeah, go plan your meals with ChatGPT, please.
Yes, and coach, also like I always say to people when I'm meal planning, I can educate you on some stuff, but like I don't really know how your kitchen is, what you actually want to cook, what you're actually going to eat. It doesn't just matter about you, what your kids are going to eat, what all of that. So here's the broad structure, and then you've got to, and again, it's about empowering people anyway. So I don't think meal plans are super helpful often. Thank you so much. That was such a good a really good little tip to end on, and this has been really great. What if people want to reach out to you or work with you?
Yeah, so I'm very active on Instagram at Bite Size Nutri. So it's like bite size nutrition, but without the TION at the end. And you can also, I have a podcast called the Bite Size Nutrition Podcast. I talk a lot about improving relationship with food, body image, self-esteem, things like that. And if you go on my Instagram and let's say you're someone that thinks about food all the time, you're like, oh God, food is always on my mind. I have a little 3-day freebie for you that's called the Food Noise Fix that walks you through why you think about food all the time and a couple of steps towards relieving some of that food noise. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely great.